They said to me on the way in, "Are you the rare disease guy?" I'm in. My name is Ed Fennell. I'm a retired grandfather, and I take care of 2 special needs children. And I've been doing that. Haley, the oldest one, is 6.5 years old, so obviously I've been doing this over 6 years. Let me give you a little bit of my background. I had a professional business for about 35 years. I specialized in local government finance and big collective bargaining contracts, mainly police and fire, coast to coast. I made my living having the skills of an expert witness. I used to testify for them in their court cases and their arbitration. About 10 years ago, I started to peel the business back, and I became what you often become when you get my age, is the available babysitter for my first few grandchildren. I loved it. I just absolutely loved it. It led me to my first 2, and then my oldest daughter, my stepdaughter, said, "Would you take care of my baby?" And I said, by all means. I was frightened after I gave her the answer yes, because I knew it would be Monday through Friday, whatever, 7 to 4, whatever, wherever the times were. And along came Haley Elizabeth Hilt, born on January the 4th, 2007. At 6 weeks of age, Mommy, Daddy, and myself started to notice odd behaviors. They were, in fact, what we justified as startle response. They, in fact, were seizures. Along about 2 months old, if you were really astute, you would notice the baby's head not often coming erect and then going right back down. A floppy baby. In the business, hypotonia. We don't have to get into the science of it. Once you enter that world as a parent, as an advocate for your child, with a child like that, you are entering the world where in all likelihood it may take you 7.5 to 8 years to get a diagnosis. You might go through 8 doctors. Lord knows how many misdiagnoses you will go through. How many stupid questions you will be asked over and over and over and over again. You learn that lesson real fast. Now, those lessons you learn don't necessarily turn into skills to deal with it. Because you're up against medical. You're up against emergency room. You're up against doctors who don't know. I've been part of a team of people, of the award-winning documentary people, and we're currently working hard trying to put on a global film documentary for rare disorders. You can find many films, many good finance campaigns to raise money for specific ones, but you don't find it for rare disorders. 4 years later into my life comes baby number 2 of my daughter, who lost 98% of the small intestines at 2 days old. It was part of her large, and the ileocecal valve, which is very important between the small and the large. She survives today with a single lumen coming out of her back, and when she's fed, a tummy tube and an ostomy bag. I'm neither bragging or complaining when I tell you that the 2 children I care for by day, matter of fact, I just dropped the little one off to mom. The big one will come home about 2:30, 2:45 on school bus. The one who was 6.5, those seizures, that floppiness, actually today has evolved to an absolutely drop-dead gorgeous 6.5-year-old girl who will never walk, will never talk, and has limited use of her hands. She has a genetic mutation of the CDKL5 gene, depriving of her of a necessary protein for synaptic growth, therefore no full development. Miss Emily, obviously, having an ileostomy bag and a tummy tube and a line is complicated medically, but totally normal. I'm neither bragging or complaining when I tell you those stories, except for one thing. My daughter and her husband and I have become skilled at managing those things. If I go to you as a doctor, a brand new doctor, I move to a new town, the single best question that doctor could ask me when I present the 2 children is, tell me about it. Because they will not know. They need to be schooled. It took 3.5 years for us to get a formal diagnosis on the big one, Haley, 6.5. And it was only by accident at Boston Children's Hospital, when she was being examined for epilepsy, that some student involved in some other project in another part of the hospital became part of rounds, noticed the stereotypical hand clapping, and it took 2 tests to get to that gene. I could take you out of here today and bring you down to Albany Med or St. Peter's or over at St. Mary's and introduce you to a host of parents. The child is 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. Teachers are confused, the therapists are confused, and they don't have any diagnosis today. There are 7,000 to 8,000 rare disorders in the books today, legitimate. $400 drugs approved for 7,000 disorders. And when you have one of these 7,000, you often need more. What happens is, once you have a rare disorder, even if you got a diagnosis the day you were born, there are still no cures and there are still no treatments. But yet you languish in this world 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 years without a diagnosis. Because you're all in an engineering school, you all understand that there's cases that fall to either side of the bell curve. There's the rarities out there. We're the rarities. In medicine, we're called zebras. It comes from a saying in medicine. If you hear hoofbeats and you turn around, don't expect to see zebras. Well, when you hear hoofbeats in my world and you turn around, you're seeing a zebra. Somebody it's almost impossible for them to diagnose. 30% go undiagnosed for a lifetime. They're virtually invisible to public policy in the statistical world. If my Haley dies as a result of her CDKL5 gene mutation complication, which she probably will one day, it'll never go registered as a CDKL5 death. Simply not written. Most of those codes are not in the medical journals. There's no place to go to look them up, even if you know, and doctors don't know. But by hook or by crook, if you have the skills and prevail, sooner or later you can get a diagnosis. And you may have heard what I already said. There are no cures and there are no best treatments. But it's not a dead end. And what? The reason I'm here is I need, I want, and I will get, sooner or later, an application available publicly, not necessarily controlled by the medical community, that will allow families, children, people who deal with rare disorders, a more efficient and quick diagnosis. Even though there are no cures and treatments. Because you know what? You can't go for a cure, you can't go for a treatment unless you know what it is. You need a name. Now, what does that name bring you if there's no cure today and there's no treatment? I'll tell you what it gives you. We, our family, is part of an organization called the International Foundation of CDKL5. We have, I think, 285 families. We are supporting leading-edge stem cell research in 6 major medical centers throughout the country. And if I need help, don't call the doctor about my CDKL5 program. I call the mother of all the rest, or the father of all the rest. They're the ones that have the experience with it. So even though there are no cures for most of those 7,000s and there are no treatments, they need a diagnosis so they can identify with their family. Our family is CDKL5 community. Other people's may be an 11Q. And most of these disorders are genetic that aren't getting done with multiple problems. You will live a life, and again, I'm not bragging and complaining, of long-term complex chronic care. And you need your support group to be able to survive in that arena. A more practical point for this is, if it's taking 7.5, 8 years and 8 doctors to get a diagnosis, guess how much private money could come into that field if everybody were diagnosed within a year? And obviously that's a pie in the sky. You'd have all these people with a thing, a label, and all of a sudden now the industry who deals with it, medical or pharmacological or whatever the science is, can jump on it. They not only can jump on it and say, 11Q and CDKL5 and MICP2 appear to all have something in common. Happens to be the protein pathway that deals with the myelin sheath around the nerves, dealing with all the synapses. And all of a sudden, what you're starting to do is also bring science together. But we can't bring science together unless we have a diagnosis. My motivation are 2 beautiful girls that I take care of. I'm at a time in my life where I still got some energy left and I have a skill set to drive it. And I became very frustrated for our community. On December the 7th, I penned off a 1.5-page letter to Albany Medical Center, Albany Medical College, and Albany Medical Foundation. I pointed out to them some of the same facts and arguments that I've shared with you. I said that the literature tells us 7.5, 8.5% of the population goes through a rare diagnosis at any given time. It has no cure, it has no treatment, it is long-term complex chronic care. And imagine how much of your hospital's revenue and expense structure is what that dollar value of those people is. Now, if there are 8% going through Albany Med at any given time, and you know they involve long-term complex chronic care, you know that they're not dollar for dollar with the average patient. They're obviously going to be a multiple of that. And I said, those people don't get the service that they need or deserve, and I imagine that even your staff, and I'm talking doctors, become frustrated with it. The letter was not written as a criticism of them, but just please take a look at this complex field. Lo and behold, 2 months later, I get a call. You come to a meeting. They gave me a small budget, and on February 28th of this year, we held the Albany Medical Center, Albany Medical College Forum on Rare Disorders. I had 2.5 weeks to put it on. I did my best at putting it out there, and I had over 100 people in a room, doctors, therapists, school people, small fundraising organizations for individual rare disorders, and a lot of energy developed. At this time, there is a committee about to meet that involves some hospitalists and pediatric specialists to deal with their calling inpatient diagnostic dilemmas. In other words, they want to take a look at how they can get a diagnosis faster in pediatrics. The NICU and the PICU, those are the places where they take care of babies who have real intense special needs, whose life is threatened. We also have an outpatient group working together with Center for the Disabled, the Down Syndrome group, and we're going to try and put together a specialty clinic just to deal with these. We have some neighbors in this area. They live up country out here in Able Park, who are award-winning documentary people. I asked them if they'd like to get involved. They said yes, and that's where that title, When Doctors Don't Know, comes from. And then there's you guys. And what happened is on 4th of July, I wrote up this need, basically, which I'm not the software or the online whiz kids. I come from the days of punch cards and 16-inch floppies and 16K processors. I don't know nothing about today, except I know it works good. And I said to myself, I'd like to have an application that I could access on my computer or on my mobile device, where every time I brought my child or my patient or myself to a doctor, I could capture that record. I want that record chronological, because oftentimes in rare diseases developing in children, their onset of when certain symptoms happens is very indicative of what it really is. But I want all of those doctors' observations in the record. And the interesting part about rare disorders are, let's say this guy's a doctor and he's from Madrid, Spain. And this couple here has a child that is 11 months old. And they have a whole pile of records. They're general practitioner, they're pediatrician. Everybody's scratching their head. They're getting bounced around from specialist to specialist. But one of the things they have in their record is doctors, by and large, although they're not good at diagnosing rare disorders, and I'm not complaining, they shouldn't be, they're very good at symptomatology. This finger being longer than this finger may indicate a rare disorder, but that's very defined. A certain set of the ears, wide of the eyes. We might not be able to tell somebody has got a complex, rare developmental disorder. But there are triggering symptomatologies. And they're very good at what you don't have that's very important to a diagnosis. But that's in their records. And I give it to this guy from Madrid, and he goes, holy shit, nobody diagnosed that? It's patently clear. Because he's the only guy in the world that ever diagnosed it before. Some of these diseases, there may be only 6, 10, 12, 20, 30, 80 people around the world that have diagnosed some of these things. And they have to see it. That's another component that flips through my mind. How does this information get to these people on certain lists? But then there's something even more fundamental. I now have an application that has medical records. But I also know that Harvard, MIT, and Boston Children's collaborated about 5 years ago on a diagnostic piece of software, very sophisticated, with every possible symptomatology of 5,000 rare diagnostic disorders. It's there. How do I, when those guys have been running around for a whole year or 2 years or 3 years or 4 years as the clock ticks and they don't get a diagnosis, how do I interface the symptomatology that they have, that they've acquired from their doctor's records, up against that database? How do I do that? How do I bridge that? I can't do that because I'm not that kind of person. Let me tell you what happens when you have only those two pieces. I said to myself, this goes back 3 months ago when this was generating in my head. I went to our notebook. We have a notebook that's now about this thick on Haley Elizabeth, who's 6.5 and CDKL5. And I went back to when she was 4 months old. And there was a pediatric neurologist who diagnosed her. He came close, but he didn't hit on the head. And I looked down the symptomatology that he had, and there were only two that made sense. I've already mentioned it to you. Seizures, which in the business, if you know anything about it, early onset seizures with children under a year. Trouble, real trouble. And floppy, I think the therapists call it hypotonia. So I went to an online, publicly available database created by some student out of a thesis back a few years ago from the University of Copenhagen. And it's called Find Zebra. And I typed in early onset seizures and hypotonia. CDCAL-5, my daughter's diagnosis. And the other one on top was its cousin. What the hell prevented medical officers from doing this and pointing us in that direction? Nothing but the lack of use of online resources. Nothing prevented it. I go around right now and say, hey doc, you seen simulcontest? Hey doc, you seen Find Zebra? Hey doc, have you used this one coming out of NIH and the National Genome Project? No, I haven't. I'll send you an email or whatever. So I went to the literature, and the literature says it's not used. My time's almost up here, so I'm going to wrap it up. One of the recent studies put out on rare disorders by the Shire Drug Corporation, a very big one, who deals in what they call orphan disease drugs. Oh, by the way, in '83, the federal government passed an act called the Orphan Disease and Drug Act. It'll give you some idea of how on the margins rare disorders are. The name of the drugs that treats us is called orphans. Orphan treatments, orphan products. 30 years today for that drug act. And it has created some good things. But the Shire Drug Corporation concluded it takes people 7.5 years to get a diagnosis, and they go through 8 doctors. With the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, whatever you want to call it, things are only going to get worse for us. Because coming into the system are people who were heretofore uninsured or underinsured, who have chronic illnesses, who take more time, and we will all find the resources stretched. There's a shortage of physicians. There's no way people can afford to pay $600,000, $700,000 to get a certain degree or specialty. The biggest shortages now, before Obamacare and Affordable Care Act comes in, is pediatricians, pediatric neurologists. Why? It takes the longest and it's paid the least. So our shortages are going to get greater. And effectively, I am starting to say, and I'm going to be writing soon, that the medical community basically has abandoned this field. What will happen to them with that 11-year-old child? They'll go to a specialist. It'll take 7 months to get in. He'll look at the child from a gastro point of view because that's part of the symptoms. It won't fit his normal pattern because there are other things going on in the child. That's why the child really has another symptom. I'm not sure about it. Goes back, it's an inadequate report to the GP who sends him to another one who pretty much does the same thing, and that goes on for 7 months. I'm not being critical when I say this. There is a need for other services, other tools to come into this field to help the medical community, help the doctors, help the patients, and to help the families. So when I threw my idea for an app on paper, I said to myself, who am I going to send this to? Then I realized I was dealing possibly with a community of open source. I went on and found out RPI had a program. I put it up there on your listserv, and Luis and David got back to me. And here I am. This is a big deal. Rare disorders are 7-8% of the world. They don't have cures. They don't have best practices. They need diagnosis so they can get organized. And there needs to be products to fill that 7 or 8 year gap and bring it back. And I'm arguing, and I'm absolutely convinced, that if we can link records with databases that suggest diagnosis, even if they bring the list from 7,000 down to 7, they can go back and say, Doc, it's in the Fragile X category, it's on the autism spectrum, and it's in this part of the autism spectrum. So, pick from one, or send me to a specialist who knows that area so that they can order that specific test. And here we are, right at the edge of the Bloom and next generation sequencing, because it has gotten so cheap. And what it needs is good clinical applications. This project, if it can be done, is not wasted effort. It's actually moving right into the future. Because in fact, in the future, we will be looking at personalized medicine in some ways. And personalized medicine will be hung off next generation sequencing. It won't always give us good answers, but it will give us answers. That's it. Anybody got any questions? I think I used my half hour. I said 15, 20 minutes. Anybody got any questions? Yes.
So a few decades ago, right, when medical technology was less advanced, many of these diseases would have been outright fatal, or quite immediately so. So within a few days of birth, you would have had mortality. As medical technology improves, we're actually saving more lives and shifting them over now to chronic care. For the symptoms, even if we don't have specific treatments for the causes. So as technology continues to improve, do you see that number of 7,000 diseases actually increasing as we shift diseases from the immediately fatal category into the chronically managed category, and actually increasing the percentage of people with so-called rare diseases?
The answer to all your questions is yes. I have my two children. Haley would have been one of the state institutions. Languishing. There was a major age difference here. When I was young, walking the streets, and there was a woman pregnant, went to the hospital to deliver, who didn't come home with her baby, went to one of the centers if it had major developmental disorders, where they languished very poorly. So my Haley might not have even made it. My Emily, the short-gut baby, certainly would have gotten it because of the lack of infectious disease control, because she has a central line. So I'm a perfect example of two cases. Yes, they move into long-term complex chronic, but I can tell you this: if we're lucky in a sense with Emily, because we know exactly what she has, because it's obviously apparent what she has. And the long-term chronic care aspect of that, this society wanted to send us a full-time nurse. Live in a house. They thought it was, that's me. It's my daughter. That's, my son-in-law. We do stuff that the medical community can't. And that's another part of the program I'm working on. A lot of people with with real skills who need to be validated, who do take care of these long-term, complex chronic care. But you're right, they would have died at one time. And yes, we are going to have more. In the age of personalized medicine and gene sequencing, today they can do a test that'll tell you, in other words, I don't know, he's got cholesterol or a heart problem, I want to give him a statin. His genes say, they don't work on this guy, they work on him. So we're all going to be benefited by that. And yes, we will come up with more categories. Actually, they both have the same problem. But his genes are not the same as his genes. So the medicine that works on him doesn't work for him. So in a sense, we're all benefiting by that. And what's going to happen in rare disorders is those where they are the densest, the most complex, and the most severe. But out of that, we're going to learn an enormous amount about what we are. For instance, my daughter Haley, that my granddaughter had. If you looked at her, she's absolutely perfect. There are pictures where you would never know. And by the way, she's starting to learn how to communicate on a computer. However, there's a guy in Scotland, a Scottish researcher, who did an experiment a few years ago as he was getting older. He was sure it would fail. And he actually reversed the symptomatology of a disorder related to Haley's. And all it was, and I'm going to simplify it for you, it was a gene that was stuck. In other words, a gene that blocked all the rest from giving her great development. And when that gene was fixed, the mice in his mice model got better. Actually, there was an article that showed up in Journal of Neurodevelopmental Disorders. It basically said they will be able to solve most major forms of mental retardation because what it is genes that are dysfunctional at a certain age. They either turn on when they shouldn't or turn off when they shouldn't. So those types of findings are going to benefit us all. Enjoy. Yes.
Have you done any research on like the legal complications of this? Just because like my dad used to do EMR stuff, right? There's a lot of laws with regards to patient information, whether or not it comes from the patients. And so like it might be a lot trickier than you think to have an app that's actually legal in the United States that stores medical records.
Let me put it to you
patient
this way.
records.
I got a right to my own records, to copy of them. They actually belong to the medical system, to be fair. Yeah, they belong to doctors and hospitals. But nobody prevents us. There's limited exceptions where they can't give certain things. So you can't get it. I could have brought my book here today for Haley. There's no legal complications passing that around. As long as my daughter or husband don't mind. So, in answer to your question, sure, we have to look at some of those issues. But if you look at it quite simply, does somebody, have the ability to throw theirs out there for some type of cloud diagnosis? I do it in a heartbeat. What do you call it? As long as my daughter and her husband have the family agree. But it's something, yes, we will have to look at. Obviously, the information's got to be sheltered. Maybe call it unique identifier. By the way, there is cloud diagnosis now. I can't think of the site you've seen it. It's some site that somebody. Yes.
So maybe, first of all, thank you, Debbie, for coming. I would say maybe one last set of thoughts would be how we as RCOS can help and tackle this. You might not have definitive answers yet as to how big of a team, how many folks get involved, how big of a team, what kinds of apps, what kinds of how to actually get this thing kind of concept to something.
It's conceptual at this point.
Yeah.
The more I talk about it, whether it's with you or staff, or Louise, it starts to get some structure. I have in my head a much larger concept. Data records.
So on the other hand, last semester, Ethan, baby notes, will baby notes be applicable for this kind of baby notes could be adapted for this? You have to
I
speak
mean,
up.
I can't develop it myself.
But
Yeah, it's kind of similar.
similar,
For me, and I'm not doing the technical components, for me, if I were using this 6 years ago, I want to be able to throw those symptoms in. I want it to be able to give me a very limited number of diagnoses, all of which would probably be, I'm going to use the word chromosomally related. I'd want to know who are the specialists who have dealt with those. And in some of these diseases, it'll only be research people. People who have dealt with mouse models in labs. I would want to know doctors who are treating it. And then I would want to know who are the organizations that support parents and patients and babies in these things. At least those 4 components, because it fits the need of finding who your family is. The first night we ever got a diagnosis of CDKL5, we got a call from a PhD MD in Perth, Australia. They were looking to drag us into the family. It was a wonderful way of finding out what we're going to deal with in the future. But those are at least 4 components. And I do know sources of, if you will, information or tables that relate to that. but it's conceptual.
Maybe one last thing in closing would be, once again, thank you. And I know the game plan that we talked about is for the fall semester, so essentially end of August when that starts up, is to get even multiple groups working on this. So all of you here today, I know most of you are going to be in RCOS come the fall. If you're looking for a project or looking for an additional project or something to get involved with, definitely at least email me, if not the entire group, and we'll get this momentum going for the fall. Now we can really nail down what pieces are needed and so on.
One last thing I wanted to leave you with, and I started doing this in the last 6 months, start to ask friends and family around the table. Any of you are interested in this, who has a rare disorder, who has been misdiagnosed, who has been dealing for too many months or too many years. You'd be surprised. You'd really be surprised. And when I say 7 or 8% of the population is involved with this at any given time, you'd be surprised. Because that group also, you must include in that 7% spouses, siblings, parents who take care. It's enormous. Thank you very much.